Thank you for joining the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston for our weekly online Ministers Forum. I'm the Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, Senior Minister of the Congregation. These programs are conversations with community organizers, scholars, religious leaders, and others about how we can collectively address the present crisis. Their purpose is to offer members of our community and all who wish to join us online science-based resources and liberation-oriented inspiration to get us through these difficult times. Today, I'm joined by the Reverend L.A. McCrae for a conversation on how we can respond faithfully to the death of George Floyd, the nationwide protests calling for justice, and the ongoing public health crisis of white supremacy. In light of the emerging situation, my conversation with Diana Straussman on feminist economics has been rescheduled for later in the summer. Reverend McCrae is a Black, radical emergent liberation theologian engaging the project of liberation at the intersections of social enterprise, prison abolition and decarceration, the opioid pandemic, complex trauma, survival sex, and public health. They're currently working on 2 doctorates, a Doctor of Public Ministry and Public Engagement, a Doctor of Ministry and Public Engagement at Wesley Theological Seminary, and a Doctorate of Public Health at Morgan State University. They keep a blog at lamccrae.com. For those of you who are with us for the first time, let me say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. We are a religious tradition that celebrates the possibility of goodness within each human heart, the transformative power of love, and the clarifying force of reason. We believe we need not think alike to love alike. We hope that you find these forums a source of connection, hope, and clarity. L.A., thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin.
So you are both a former police officer and a formerly incarcerated person. And I just wonder if you could begin by sharing how your experiences have shaped your understanding of the death of George Floyd.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think that, it's really important to lift not only George Floyd, but I must also lift the assassination of Jerry Williams, who was assassinated by the Asheville Police Department in July of 2016, Freddie Gray, Corinne Gaines, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others who were made ancestors before their time. So, briefly, as a young kid, I grew up in Bel Air, Maryland, which had about 4% Black folks. And the Black folks that I grew up with were working folks, professional folks, folks in law enforcement and the military. And my understanding as a Black United Methodist was that I could be both involved in faith-based organizing and activism and civil service. So from a very young age, I got involved with the Bel Air Police Department Explorer Program and later the Maryland State Police Explorer Program and led the Harford County Sheriff's Youth Academy. And after that, I became a cadet with the Knoxville Police Department and went through the training academy. While I was a cadet at the Knoxville Police Department, I was one of 3 Blacks on the force and saw the direct ways that myself and the other 2 Blacks, one of whom was Stan Cash, were intentionally used to police, and the direct words were capture and arrest, right? Black people that I knew, Black people that went to my family's church on the east side. And I realized I was a part of, what was wrong. Like, it was not honorable to serve in police departments, even with, the community-oriented policing. I learned the Blue Code. I was present in, a training scenario while I was a cadet, and participated because I was present in an illegal speed trap, which led to, someone being seriously injured, and learned how to cover it up with the internal affairs, right? Though I was not asked, the training officers were. So I saw and I witnessed personally the ways in which white supremacy was at work in law enforcement. And I immediately got out once I knew better. So I had to do better. And then, thinking about George Floyd, I was in Asheville when Jerry Williams was assassinated by the police department, and it's that level of hate, of vitriol, of embodied rage, right? Because that officer had embodied rage, had embodied hatred, and took that out on innocent Black life. So, for many people, they are radicalized by this moment. And I think for most Black folks in America, our lives have radicalized us, right? We are veterans of being Black and white supremacy. So, through that lens, I know that we must demand justice now. We must demand abolition. We must demand the defunding of the police department in defense of Black lives, and certainly to participate in the project of liberation for Black lives.
So we'll talk a little bit later about your work as a prison and police abolitionist and sort of defunding police departments. But first, I thought I just would reach back a little bit to the question and see if you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience as a formerly incarcerated person, how that's helped you gain an understanding of what's going on, or a perspective about what's going on right now.
Yeah, so I became incarcerated because of a white woman that made false allegations and went to the commissioner's office in Baltimore County and lied. And then next thing I know, I was being arrested from the house in my sleep. This continued off and on for the larger part of the last 2 years, where I've been accused multiple times of white women for crimes that I literally did not commit, could not have committed, and on camera elsewhere. It's just absolutely ridiculous that I've sat and others have sat, right? Other women are sitting behind jail cells and prison cells right now for crimes that they did not commit. And when we think about this, right, from a science-based perspective, with the folks that struggle with substance use disorder, who need to feed that addiction because it's a chronic disease, they're often engaged in survival sex and dealing with processed and sometimes undiagnosed complex trauma. So when we put those ingredients together in a stew and add in poverty and hopelessness and despair and chronic unemployment and housing instability, that creates the root causes of addiction, which we know impacts the development of our brains. So how then can we as a nation hold responsible folks that struggle with substance use disorder and criminalize that pain and suffering when we know there are bioneurological changes to their brains? So that always gets me fired up, right? When we talk about why we need not just reform, because reform states that we are complacent, right, with the system the way it is. We are not complicit or complacent with the way the system is. We know that by intention and design of the United States prison system, it was always designed to oppress folks that look like me, right? And it's the responsibility of us, right, to make sure that we dismantle that system. The system has emerged out of slave patrols. The system emerges out of slavery and oppression of my people on this looted land. So when I think about the folks saying that, there's violence happening right now because white insured property is being destroyed, let's be clear about the conversation, right? So I hear that and I can hold space for that, but I will not criminalize that behavior or that rage. The reason that's important in the context of mass incarceration is because it's that same Black anger and Black rage with unjust systems, with unjust leaders, with tyrants, right? That weight, that invisible weight of oppression that causes people to act because their voices are not heard. And the criminalization of acts of liberation is evil. So I think that we need to look at the entire system, not only dismantle it, because that's what the people who are most oppressed are saying, but to truly think about solutions on how we connect in community authentically.
Yeah, well, I think that it provides a bridge for us to talk about prison and police abolitionism, because I know that you identify as a prison and police abolitionist, and you just referenced that. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what this kind of abolitionism is, and then sort of what alternatives people propose, because I know that that's often one that comes up when people mention police and prison abolition. Oh, there's no real alternative. We have to have these systems. So, if you could share with us a bit about that.
So let me address this by saying, by taking us back, right, and thinking about the folks who were slaves on this land and how impossible it must have been to say something so bold like abolishing slavery, like abolishing the slave patrol. What would we do? How would this continue? How does that even happen? What's next? Well, what was next was sharecropping, right? Was Reconstruction, was the prison industrial complex, was school to prison pipeline, mass incarceration. That's what was next, right? So it's not that, yes, chattel slavery ended and we had the abolition of chattel slavery, but instead y'all put us on chain gangs, right? Y'all sent us out to the cities and took us off the farms, and within less than one generation broke an entire skill set of being self-sufficient farmers. So when we think now, contemporaneously, about what prison abolition looks like, white supremacy tells us that we have to know right now what's next. Right? That's the control and the domination matrix that wants us to just dismantle this one thing to build another system, to build another institution, and to build more hierarchy. And, Angela Davis says to be radical is to grasp things at the root. So let's grasp at the root why people need Black folks to be their nigger. That's what James Baldwin said. So why is it that America needs Black folks to be their criminal? We must, for the sake of being in defense of Black lives, for the sake of participating in the project of Black liberation, which liberates us all, we must listen to the voice of the oppressed, which has said, defund the police, self-governance, abolition now. It is not our job to question. It is not our job to judge. It is not our job to debate. It is our job, our task, our duty to act in solidarity. And in this instance, the only form of solidarity is saying resoundingly, defund the police, abolition now, self-governance immediately.
So I hope that this isn't too abstract, but I think that you're lifting up a really incredibly important theological point, one that I think that people, that's just vitally important. You're a religious leader who is both in the Methodist and Unitarian Universalist tradition, and when I hear you speaking, I hear you invoking what's called liberation theology, which is this idea that God, or the divine, is found amongst the oppressed, and that if we want to transform society, if we want to really see a change, a radical change, undergo what Martin Luther King used to call a great spiritual revolution, we have to listen to and look for leadership amongst the people who are suffering most from the system in which we're in. And that liberation theology really encourages people to, of all stripes, but just to understand that God is found not in the sort of high steeple cathedral churches, but present amongst those who are suffering in the world, and that by understanding that suffering and by listening to people who are suffering from those systems, we are best able to get free, not just as individuals, but all together, that is where the message of liberation is. So I don't know if you have any particular reflections in response to that, either theologically or spiritually, that might resonate. But I think that you self-identify as a liberation theologian. So I thought that would be a good place to move to next.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think important context for me is I am, by birth, by blood, by belief, a Black United Methodist. And I grew up in the Black United Methodist tradition. And I share that because for me, growing up as a Black United Methodist meant that I was always compelled to justice making. It was always an active process. And then later, I joined Universalist National Memorial Church because I was compelled by the social rallying call of Unitarian Universalism. And so I found myself at this interesting intersection, reinvestigating the cores of my theological underpinnings. And in conversation, not just with James Cone or John Wesley, but also with James Baldwin and Adrienne Marie Brown, and have landed upon being a Black radical emergent liberation theologian. And that to me means not only grasping things at the root, not only deconstructing things through the stories and narratives of people who have, throughout their existence on this world, been struggling towards liberation and community, not only realizing, as James Cone said, that it's not just about the cross and the lynching tree, because you can lynch me, so says Cone, without a rope or a tree. It's not just about needing to confront the very things that need to be faced, or being in a place to be so open and expansive where emergence can take root, or even pleasure and pleasure activism. It's about being open and responsive to what is coming forward and the fruit that is being born and the authentic, right relations of our relationships and community. So when I think about this very specific time, I think about my canon, which consists of Baldwin and Brown and Morrison, right? Which consists of those Black political solutionaries and insurrectionists that informed my thinking today. Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, these luminaries that spoke truth to us years ago. When Booker T. Washington in 1895 said, "Cast down your buckets. In all matters, we must be as separate as the fingers, but in matters economic, we must be as tight as the fist." And when he said that, I did not understand the full context until this moment. We cannot integrate fully into a white supremacist America. And that's what has always been asked of us, because we have been unwilling to face the evils of white supremacy and of white Christian supremacy. It was James Baldwin who wrote and tried to tell his nephew, named after him, James, "My dungeon shook. I feel in my heart and soul the rage of all the Black men that came before us, James. When you read these words, you must hear my heart and know that there will be a reckoning coming. In your lifetime, maybe, but it will happen. And when that happens, it will be not water, but the fire next time. And the fire is here. The fire is now, this time. And this container for understanding, right, happens not only just through Black political education, but through truly, as James Cone says, entering into the, doesn't just say experience, but the side of the oppressed. That's what James Cone said. See, right now, so many Black folks are holding space for whiteness and for white fragility and having the conversations about, well, this isn't a binary issue. All of a sudden, it's not a black and white issue. Well, can I support you but not say I defund the police? No, that's not the ask. The ask of the people who are on the side of the oppressed is to defund the police, abolition now, self-governance immediately. That's it. Those are the things that white folks, that white allies, that everyone should be echoing around the globe. That is the ask of the people that have their backs against the wall, as Howard Thurman said, that have shoulders forcing out the life from their neck. That is the ask. So when I hear the rhetoric that there is no Black leadership, that's untrue. There's no Black leadership that white people are willing to follow in their houses of complacency and complicity. There's no plan. The plan has been made time and time again. Movement for Black Lives has outlined the plan. Well, who are they organizing? The people in power. To do what? Defund the police, abolition now, self-governance immediately. By when? Immediately. So yeah, we see Black people being forced into ghettos, right? Forced ghettotization. We see the ramifications of gentrification. So it was the Black Methodists for Church Renewal who in 1968 over 4 decades ago, said our time under God is now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next legislative cycle, not at the next voting, not the next election. Our time is now. And that is the call. And that's the excitement, right? Like, this is why Christians specifically get excited about the good news. And this is the good news. This is the gospel. That it is possible. And the impossible is the least we should expect. So, yeah, the good news for people who are suffering, the good news for those who are oppressed, for those who are incarcerated, for those who are impacted by the coronavirus, for those with their backs against the wall, the good news is the defunding of police, is abolition and self-governance. And that's the exciting project of liberation that we've been called to.
So I think we would be remiss to not bring up, as we sort of move towards the end, the fact that this good news is reaching a particular moment of crescendo right now in the midst of a pandemic. And in the midst of a pandemic that has impacted brown and black communities disproportionately, that has claimed 100,000 lives at least within the United States, although the actual toll is probably significantly more. And at this moment, these mass protests during this pandemic are carrying with them particular unique risks, because mass gatherings of any kind contain unique risks. So I'm wondering if you have particular thoughts on how people can participate in the movement for Black lives right now in the midst of this pandemic, and also what the pandemic really means for the good news, and how we should be trying to make our ways through it as religious people.
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, I think that we have to look at our response through 3 lenses. 1, through the lens of public health, because we are in a global pandemic. 2, through the lens of faithful responses to public engagement. And 3, to be embodied, to be incarnational emergent liberation theologians. So first, let's address the public health pandemic. Black and brown people are disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus, right? And it's said that when America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu, right? And for those reasons, and many others, it is imperative that white folks put their neck in the game and get in the line and make that assessment honestly in their household, right? Like, folks are afraid not to act. Folks are afraid to act. Folks are afraid that if they don't do or say the right thing, that they'll be labeled racist or white supremacist. The newsflash is that all white people on American soil are inherently racist and have been privileged by the interlocking supremacy system and white supremacy institutions. That's just true. But the exciting part of this comes in being in authentic relationships. If you're in authentic relationships with folks who are Black leaders, then this is your time to act. Maybe that does look like putting your physical body on the front lines. Maybe that looks like sponsoring someone who's there. Be an intentional relationship. More also, look at the ways that the coronavirus is impacting Black and brown communities in your area. What can you do to alleviate pain and suffering in your area? What can you do to speed up medical resources? What can you do to participate in justice making at the intersections of being mindful of public health, public engagement, and public sacred witness? I think that we must be creating space in more entryways and on-ramps for people. I've seen a lot of white allies, white comrades, white solidarity partners say, hey, I'm here. If you need help figuring out what to do, talk to me. Don't ask another Black or brown person to do more uncompensated emotional labor. And it looks like maybe staging both in-person protests and rallies and virtual rallies. Perhaps it looks like increased social distancing, right? This is our time to be creative. Adrienne Marie Brown calls us to think about this time to be extremist and to be creative as we center pleasure. Yes, there is Black rage. That is justified. And we can also think through what is life-giving in these moments. What is life affirming? What is life nourishing? And what is life sustaining? And have those conversations with Black folks and participate in that. Trust Black folks. Trust those who are saying repeatedly, we are on the side of the oppressed. So I think, thinking through that lens and being real and honest and having those conversations is what's required. And also being willing to call your other friends out or in that just are not moving in integrity. Recently, I had a conversation with a colleague who said that, well, they can't possibly go out to protest, but they were going out to eat with their family because the restaurants just opened up. That lacks integrity. If we can go out to eat with our families, we can put our bodies on the line for justice making and Black liberation. We are being called in this moment, not just to Black liberation, but to also be in defense of Black lives, because Black lives have been under attack since the first Black body was transported across the Atlantic Ocean. Black lives have been under attack since Trayvon Martin. Black lives have been under attack since the NAACP had to get a sign made and start lynching it and since the NAACP had to get a sign to start saying a man was lynched today, because it happens so often. So people are being called to radical non-conformity in defense of Black lives at the intersection of Black liberation immediately.
I love that phrase, radical nonconformity. I think that is just, in some ways, maybe encapsulates what is required. I mean, we are in this moment where it's just, I've talked about it in sermons about how we're in an apocalyptic time where like things that have been hidden from us or from many people perhaps are now suddenly just laid bare. The exploitation of labor, the white supremacist system that we're in, and at this apocalyptic moment when all of these things that have been veiled to us have now been laid bare, to engage in radical nonconformity. I think that is exactly what the transformation that needs to happen calls upon each of us.
Can I be my pastor and say, well, I say this to say as I take my seat, we're being called to center Black lives in this moment. We are being called to say that white supremacy will no longer interrupt our regularly scheduled program, right? And I hope that from this conversation, people can take away three things. One, this is our time to act, to accept, to name, and to repent. Two, this is our time to actively be in the process of Black liberation by the dismantling of white supremacy institutions and divesting from white supremacy institutions. That could look like banking Black, investing Black, buying Black, voting Black, right? There are so many ways to participate in that. And number three, to know and to be reassured and to have hope that prison abolition and decarceration are possible now, because that is the least we can expect.
I think that frame of those three things is very, very helpful. And I think that I would be remiss to not lift up two sort of final things as we move to the close here. One is that the Movement for Black Lives has called this a week of action in defense of Black lives. And for people who are trying to figure out how to engage, what can you do right now? You can go to m4bl.org and look at their week of action. Every day there's a different thing that they're encouraging people to do. The other thing is, I know, LA, you are working with a group of faith leaders on an event or a thing for faith communities to do, a call to action for faith communities this Sunday at 11 a.m., which I know we're planning on taking time in our service to honor that call. And I wonder if you could talk about that for just a couple minutes here by way of closing.
Yes, so this Sunday we are inviting people to a National Day of Sacred Witness to observe 11 a.m. as an hour of sacredness for Black liberation. Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Malcolm X said that 11 a.m. is the most segregated hour in this country. Let's reclaim that, and let's be justice builders, community builders. Let's be peace builders this Sunday. We're asking folks to center Black lives in worship, to get out on the front lines. We're asking folks to give to Black organizations, and we're asking folks, as John Wesley would say, to do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. And Bishop Felton Edwin May would often add, but make sure to get off your can. So by way of closing, please, y'all, get off your cans, defund the police, abolition now, self-governance immediately. Black love.
Thank you, LA, for joining us. That was, I think, a very powerful conversation, and I hope that you and I have the opportunity to be in dialogue going into the future. I'd like to thank all of our members and friends for tuning in to watch us, and then I hope you'll join us next week when we'll be talking with Professor Mayra Rivera of Harvard University and President-elect of the American Academy of Religion about how apocalypticism, liberation theology, and decolonial theory can help us respond to the present moment. If you found this video to be helpful, I hope you'll consider joining us for our weekly worship service. It's posted online each Sunday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. This week, the Reverend D. Scott Cooper will be preaching a sermon titled Patience, Ourselves, and Others, and we will be offering a prayer for George Floyd and all the victims of white supremacy as part of the observation of that LA just spoke of. So I'd like to thank our staff for making this video possible. It was produced by Christian Holmes. Alma Vizcarra assisted with the editing. A special thank you this week to Aisha Hauser for helping arrange our guest. We'll see you all online soon and in person as soon as it's possible for us to gather again. And please remember that no matter how isolated you are, we're all in this together.